Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Welcome to Woman. We are at the Chautauqua Institute in Chautauqua, New York. The Institute, which for 100 years has provided educational, religious, recreational, and cultural opportunities for persons of all ages. My guest this evening came here to work on her latest book and to lecture as a guest of the Chautauqua Literary and Scientific Circle. With me is Elizabeth Janeway, author of many novels including Walsh Girls, Daisy Kenyon, Leaving Home, and The Third Choice, as well as two very well-known works of nonfiction, Man's World, Woman's Place, and her most recent work, Between Myth and Morning, Women Awakening. Welcome, Elizabeth.
It's nice to be here.
Elizabeth, in your book, you talk about, in Between Myth and Morning, you talk about having a little trouble with being 60.
I guess we all have trouble being 60, but then we have trouble being almost any age. My trouble is that sometimes I wake up in the morning and think I'm 31. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and think I'm 110, too, or afternoons even. It isn't really trouble. I don't think that. I think what I meant really was that part of the women's movement is that we do, I believe, within it, bridge a generation gap. We are able to talk to each other across years. That's because we are working for something. We have a togetherness that is an identity involved in a process of activity, something to be done, something we are working for, and age is not important then.
What motivated you to write Man's World, Woman's Place?
I guess I wanted to explore, to find out. I find out by writing. I think most writers do. What I wanted to know about was the great social changes of the 60s that were taking place very fast, very rapidly. The civil rights movement, the youth movement, the student movement. These were all things in which people were catching up with the world of reality, with what had already happened. And I wanted to understand it. I'm not young, I'm not black. I couldn't really write about those things with a full knowledge, though I was interested and sympathetic. But what was happening to women, yes, that I do know about. I've worked all my life. I've been married for a long time. I have children, I have grandchildren. I've done drudge work as well as career work. I think I have a sense of what it's like inside as well as outside. So I took that part of social change to explore.
That book took you 6 years to write.
Yes, I was doing some other things too. It's true, but I think of it really as my first book, because writing nonfiction is different from writing fiction. You have to get along without all those wonderful things that you have in fiction, like interesting characters and suspense and narrative and dialogue that you hope is witty and arresting at any rate. You're just talking about ideas. I got awfully charged up about those ideas, and I got very excited learning to do it, but it did take a while to find out how.
Betty Friedan claims that when she was writing The Feminine Mystique, sometimes she hid it in the closet and she wouldn't let anyone see it, and she had a great deal of difficulty adjusting to what she was saying in the book. Did you have any of those problems?
Perhaps less with Man's World than with my fiction. I never let anybody see my fiction until I'm finished, because I don't know what's going to happen. I start out with a situation in which some people are stuck. They've got a problem, and they have to get out of it, and the book is how they get out of it, what they do to resolve the business at the beginning. With nonfiction, it's different. You're much more conscious of an audience, and so I didn't mind having people read that in part as I was going along and tell me if they didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't want them to make suggestions about how to do it, but I did want to know whether they were getting what I meant. I should say that the people. When I say people, I mean my husband and my younger son. So it was written for a male audience, and a sympathetic audience, an audience that I thought would understand what I was talking about without any special knowledge. I left my older son out only because he is professionally an editor, and I felt that I didn't want to write for an editor. I wanted to write for a general reader.
Some time ago, Ms. Magazine, I think it was in the first issue, had an article about consciousness raising and clicks that people have. You know, sudden realization, something's wrong here. Have you ever had a click?
Oh, yes, over and over and over again, and all the time still things happen that I hadn't really seen before, how they connect. I reread, and after all, how long ago could it have been that I read it first? I reread Virginia Woolf's The Room with a View just this past winter before I went and talked up at Boston College, and so much came into place. She's talking about the voice that women write in. I'm a woman writer, and all of a sudden I saw what she meant, that the tone of voice which women have been writing in, successful women writers have written in a male tone of voice for almost as long as they've been writing. Now it's beginning to change. As she notes, there were always a few people who didn't. Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte, but it was much harder for them to be taken seriously because they were not writing in this logical, straightforward, masculine, I'm laying it out, you know, so that you can see it clearly step by step kind of way. Right now, more and more, women are writing not only out of their experience, but in their own words and voice.
And it's somewhat easier for them, isn't it?
Yes, it's not easy yet because this is a hard thing to do. A lot of writing by women is thought of as being soap opera, you know. Oh, just a soap opera novel. You know, there's something about soap opera that's very interesting. It's about serious questions, much more than situation comedy is. Situation comedy is ridiculous from the word go. The premises are ridiculous, but soap opera is about crises in people's lives. It's about having a sick child, or a marriage breakup, or discovering that somebody you loved is not really who you thought he was. There's some kind of betrayal in there. These things happen to women all the time. Now, soap opera resolves them in a silly fashion, in a superficial fashion. But if you look at women's experience, their lives are full of this kind of thing, of having something break over them all of a sudden, of discovering that they have been basing a deep emotional relationship on a false understanding of it. Nobody told them. The masculine rules were what controlled it, but nobody has considered the feminine rules. Nobody has considered that there might be such things as feminine rules. We're finding all this out now.
You wrote an article at one point which you addressed to older women and talked about what their questions might be about the women's movement. Do you think the women's movement really has something to offer older women?
Yes, a great deal. A great deal. One thing I mentioned before, that bridging between generations. If, for instance, you are 20 and your mother and maybe your grandmother agree that the Equal Rights Amendment would be a good thing to go through, you can talk together, you can work together, you can share and hold hands doing something in a way that is hard in other circumstances.
But doesn't the movement in a way say to older women your goals were too small, and maybe therefore make some women feel that they've wasted some time or not spent it wisely?
Yes, well, it's older women feel that. The people who have committed themselves to the traditional role, of course, do feel that if the movement says there ought to be more to life than this, the movement is saying to them, you've made a mistake and you've invested years in doing silly things. That isn't really what the movement's saying, because the movement values women's work, even Even that housework, you know, that the people who do it describe as being just a housewife. I wouldn't say that. I think the creation of a place in which children grow up understanding the world and being able to take part in it is an enormously important piece of work, but it isn't anything that people get paid for, you know. And in our society, most of us value what we do by how much we get paid. So that kind of work is undervalued, not by the women's movement, but by our society,
It's another
basically.
common mistake people make about
Yes.
the women's movement. They
Yes.
feel if you're a housewife, then the movement has nothing for you and doesn't want anything to do with you.
Of course it has a great deal for you. It has a sharing with other people other women who both work for pay and don't work for pay, a finding of values in common experience. You're not alone.
There's another sort of double bind that the older woman is in. She's discriminated against because she's a woman, and she's also discriminated against because she's older.
Yes, and if you think of yourself, as women have been trained to do in our society, as somebody who is seen from outside, I'm not saying just a sex object, but someone who is an appearance, a presence, rather than a doer, an activist, then if you lose your attractive appearance, you yourself feel that you are losing your value, and your own confidence and your own self-esteem begin to go down. In other societies, which are more hierarchical than ours, older women who belong to an upper class may have at least their class feelings to rest on. We don't even have that. You know, 100 years ago, the leaders of society were old women, bossy old women, who went to the big parties or not. You know, Mrs. Potter Palmer in Chicago was better off, you might say, than many women today. I don't think those are important values, but at least they did exist. Ours is a very fluid society, and women have to now to find, I think, their own values and make them together, not alone, but with each other, and understand that experience is important.
Do you think it's more difficult for older women than for older men to be daring?
I think it's always more difficult for women to be daring. Some young women are beginning now to have less trouble about it than used to be the case. I've met young women talking around at colleges who are looking ahead at their lives as if they were their brothers. I don't mean particularly with male values, but who are thinking about what they're going to do professionally as if they were looking at a life that they could control, where they wanted to choose a profession that would satisfy them and bring in enough to live on. Met a young woman out at McAllister College in St. Paul. I said, "What are you going to be doing?" She said, "Oh, I'm a geologist. I'm at graduate school now. Lots of good jobs with the oil companies."
Do you think it's important that the movement start addressing itself more than it has in the past to this age group of women?
Yes, I do.
I wonder how much chance there is of that happening, though, because the rest of society is so generally prejudiced, you know, against older people.
It certainly is. I think, but I think women are less so, and we can ourselves. And older women can do it as a kind of self-help. There's a great deal that older women can contribute just to finding each other, to saying to each other, what about us? How are we going to manage as we get older? What is happening to those who are not in their 60s but in their 70s or 80s? Couldn't we form a support group, as Maggie Kuhn has with the Grey Panthers,
Right.
for not necessarily only women, for older people? What can women in sort of later middle age do about people who are really old and aged? There's an awful lot to be done and an awful lot that can be done, and I should think there would be great rewards in doing it.
Elizabeth, why do you think that a woman's own success doesn't convince her that other women aren't inferior?
Well, if she's bought the package, the traditional role, she's bought the idea that women are inferior. And she's learned to beat the game by playing man's rules and getting where she's going on her own. But she doesn't believe that, I mean, this wouldn't in itself convince anybody that other women could easily do that. And in fact, it is hard. It takes a special thrust and determination to do it. More than it's worth, perhaps, though I don't put down success. I think success is good, and I hope more of us are successful, but I hope that we don't have to learn all the men's rules in order to be successful. I think less and less do we have to do that. I don't think we should learn, because I don't think it contributes to real success. Let's all be very hard-nosed and not work together and not help each other. That's bad. In fact, successful men, unless, you know, they get put up as somebody's protege, very often are much more intuitive and much more aware of personal relationships, the things that are feminine skills, you know, supposedly, than most men are. A man who can make it up through a big corporate environment will very often know an awful lot about who gets on well with this person or that person and what's going on subliminally in a room around a conference table. These things are theoretically feminine skills. They're just human skills.
Did you have any trouble with your own success?
No, I don't think I had very much, though I certainly said some silly things, I guess, when my first novel was successful. I guess we all have to forgive ourselves for saying silly things from time to time. By that time I was married and I had 2 small boys, so I had a lot else going on in my life. That may have been, you know, had something to do with it.
You say that the women's movement hasn't really articulated very coherently its goals.
No.
And it seems to me that the goals are clear, and I wonder what you mean about that.
I think what I mean is that we have been alive for such a short period of time that as yet we don't know what the goals are, what the biggest of them are. They will begin to come together. We know certainly what some things are that we are working toward. There could be no question about the importance of equal wages for work, of the right to control one's life and decisions over when and whether one will have children and that kind of thing. These are agreed upon, but the overriding significance of what this means to everybody in human life, we're still short of understanding. We don't really know what equality between men and women is going to give us because we've never had it.
Do you think the goals will change drastically, or do you think that maybe we can conceive of them now, or do you think it's going to be something very far out?
I think they're going to grow and lead us on to new kinds of living together. I'm a big humanist as well as being a feminist. I think this is very good for men, that there will be rewards for men here, that it's a little hard to even phrase now, but the opening to men of the possibility of expressing and feeling their full emotions, the connection, which is beginning in young families now, of young fathers with their children, is a marvelous thing for the children as well as for the men.
You also don't think that women really are responsible for the women's movement. You think technology and
I think it's a response to the changes that have gone on in the external world for the last 200 years at least. After all, people 200 years ago were living in a world that wasn't too different from what it had been for thousands of years. Most people lived on farms and families worked together. on subsistence farms, just making their livings. The little businesses that existed were very often family businesses that were run by mother and father and children and a couple of apprentices or something like that. But when the Industrial Revolution happened, and all of a sudden work began to be done not within families and by family groups, but in factories by individuals hired for a particular purpose, this just cut life in half, so that work life and the rest of life were fragmented and pulled apart. And we haven't really begun to cope with this yet.
Another thing that the people in the movement talk about almost continuously, have been since the beginning, is the absence of women from history. What do you think some of the most serious repercussions have been from that?
Loss. Think of what we've lost. We've lost the symphonies that women might have written, the operas that women might have written, the poetry that women might have written. I just reviewed a book by a professor of the classics at Hunter College, Sarah Pomeroy, on women in antiquity. There were no women poets. Sappho and another one whose name I've mislaid, much less famous than Sappho, are the only two of whom we have fragments before, I don't know, the late Middle Ages. We have a few letters that Margaret Paxton wrote in the 14th century. We have some recollections of a woman, Marjorie Kemp, who went on pilgrimage to the Holy Land in the late Middle Ages. All this is all we have.
It's a loss of psychic energy.
We know that sometimes women who were rulers, who inherited as rulers, like Elizabeth of England, were magnificent statesmen.
Women's role has always been either the wife of or, you know, something like that, their place in history.
The talent, the gift, the energy of half the human race for ages and ages and ages.
And you can't discount that.
No.
At what point do you think a women's history would not be significant?
I don't know what you mean. Women's history is all significant.
Well, do you think we would reach a point where we would really be in the time you talk about as humanism and it would not be important?
You mean in the future,
yes.
will women automatically be part of history? Much more, yes. Some of the most interesting work in women's studies is being done on history now.
You also made a statement in the book where you said women need a kind of selective insensitivity. I really like that.
Well, I think I meant that we had to be perfectly willing once in a while to say, you don't like it, huh? So what? This is important to us. We see the point. We're going to go on doing this, whether you care about it or not. And by you, I guess I mean men.
That's a tough thing.
Yeah, we're awfully worried about whether or not we are pleasing men. We still are, more than we really ought to be, because it hampers us in getting to goals that we know are important.
Well, I think the tug between our new image and our old needs is, you know, just all-encompassing, and I'm worried that we won't win that battle. How do you feel about that?
It'll take a while, and nobody should expect to be able to do it alone. This is part of the being together.
I guess this is why we have the women's movement behind us. You react rather violently to the word femininity.
I react to what most people mean by it, which is passivity and pleasing and getting things done by being charming and manipulating and that kind of thing. That doesn't mean that I don't think it's nice for people to be charming or that I think it's wrong to be polite to other people. I do, out of sheer human good feeling. We are humans together, and we get along much better if we are polite to each other and open the door for each other. But I'm perfectly ready to do it for a man who has bundles in his hand, in his arms, and I hope he'd do it for me if I had bundles in my arms. Why do we have to link this to sex?
What makes you most angry about the definition? The limitations, maybe?
The limitations, the sense that you're offering somebody a reward for doing something that hurts them. I think that's it. You're it's kind of the opposite side of the coin from the compliment that says, of course, you think like a man.
One of the things I most liked about the book was that it was so positive and so hopeful. And one of the things you said is that what women are doing now is ensuring that there won't be a decline or a downfall of the movement. Can you explain that?
Well, when my book came to be published, my publishers did a good job, but there was a certain feeling that this was another of those women's books. It came out about the time that Germaine Greer's book had come out and after Kate Millett's, so there were 3 of them in 6 months or so. And there was a feeling, well, oh gee, this really is something, and this is the thing for this year, which meant really that it was a fad, and that having had, you know, a great deal of interest in the counterculture, now we were going to be talking about women. That's nonsense. We're talking about the fact that half the human race has discovered itself and what it has overlooked about itself, and is busy making this clear to everybody, and to saying, count on us from now on, count us in. And this, I think, is what's going on. We've run into bad times this year, not just at the executive level. There's another business that says the women's movement is middle class, you know. That, if you will excuse me, is partly due to the mass media and what people think of as being newsy. Whether or not an executive gets fired can be news. I think it's more important than that GM has laid off the women foremen that they had. There's a suit in the California court about it. This kind of thing has hit us this year, and we've got to make clear that affirmative action is here to stay. I think we are going to be able to do it.
Elizabeth, we're out of time for this week. Elizabeth Janeway and I will be back next week, and we're going to talk about power and many other things. Thank you for watching.
Woman was produced by WNED-TV, which is solely responsible for its content, and was funded by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.